"You're a burden, Dad. We can't keep doing this." He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. His wife didn't flinch. She just kept scrolling on her phone, sitting right there in the home I built. The same walls that held my wife's laughter, my son's first steps, now echoed with disrespect. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I stood up, walked to the old desk drawer, and pulled out the one thing they forgot I still had. The real deed. Their faces turned ghost white. They thought they owned me. They forgot whose name was on the house. I wasn't always this quiet. Once upon a time, laughter filled this house, from the kitchen to the attic. That laughter mostly came from a boy named Eric and a woman named Marjorie. Marjorie had the warmest eyes you've ever seen. She made everything better, even when we had nothing. Our first winter in this house, the insulation was so bad we slept in the living room with the fireplace burning all night. But she'd wrap Eric in blankets, sing lullabies, and hum old tunes until he drifted off with a smile. That memory lives in the corners of this house. It always will. I built this place with my hands, wooden beams, plaster walls, bloodied knuckles. It took me 5 years of nights and weekends after my shift at the factory. Marjorie planted the front garden herself, filled it with sunflowers and tulips because she said the color made her feel like she was holding a piece of summer. Eric helped her. He'd run around the yard, knees always scraped, hands always dirty. It was a modest home, nothing fancy, but it stood tall because it was made with love and sweat and memory. When Marjorie passed, Eric was 15. I remember sitting him down in the living room, the very one he'd later try to kick me out of, and telling him, "It's just you and me now, son. We stick together." He cried into my chest. I remember holding him, thinking I had to be strong for both of us, and I was. Every day. I made breakfast every morning, packed his lunches, worked overtime so he could play sports, even took night shifts to afford his college tuition. I never missed a parent-teacher conference, not one. I was there for every broken bone, every heartbreak, every milestone. I remember when he got accepted into college. He came running into the house, waving the letter, shouting, "Dad, I made it!" We hugged in the kitchen, right next to Marjorie's old spice rack. I cried. He didn't see it, but I cried because I knew she'd be proud. I told him that, and he just nodded. He left for school, came back during summers. Those summers grew quieter, but I told myself that was normal. Young men had lives to build. He still called me Pop, still brought me souvenirs from wherever he traveled. Then he met Rachel. I remember the first time I saw her. Pretty girl, polished, polite, but cold. Her handshake was limp, her smile didn't touch her eyes. She looked around the house like it was beneath her. I tried not to judge, told myself I was being protective. They got married within a year. I gave them money for the wedding, more than I could really afford. Eric said, "You didn't have to do that, Pop," but he took it anyway. I gave him the deed to the house temporarily, too, just in case anything ever happened to me after my heart surgery. "Just a formality," I said. "But don't worry, I'm putting it in a trust. You'll handle it if anything happens." He nodded. "Of course, Dad, I'd never let anything happen to this house. It's ours." That ours used to mean something. After the wedding, they moved into the house with me. The plan was to stay for a year, save up, and then find a place of their own. I liked having company. It made the place feel alive again. At first, things were good. Rachel would make dinner some nights. Eric and I would watch sports, like old times. I gave them space, even offered to sleep in the smaller guest room so they could have the master. I thought it was a kindness. But slowly, the little things changed. My coffee mugs started disappearing, replaced with sleeker, color-coordinated ones. My recliner got moved to the garage without a word. Rachel started rearranging the living room, saying things like, "This place needs a woman's touch." I let it all slide. I didn't want to be a bitter old man clinging to routines. But I felt it, the slow erasure, like I was a shadow in my own home. Still, I held on to the good. Sunday mornings when Eric would make pancakes like he used to as a boy, or the time Rachel brought home a plant for the garden. "For Marjorie," she said. I appreciated that, even if the gesture felt rehearsed. I started to believe maybe we could be a family under one roof. Maybe I was imagining the distance, the growing silences. Maybe I was just getting old and sensitive. But deep down, something had shifted. I could feel it. Like the walls remembered what warmth used to feel like, and now they were just watching it fade. One evening I found an old photo album on the shelf. Eric's first birthday, Marjorie in her apron, me in overalls holding a hammer. I sat alone on the porch, flipping through those pages as the sun dipped below the trees. I heard laughter inside, Rachel's sharp, clipped voice, Eric chuckling. They didn't know I was out there. Or maybe they didn't care. I looked at that photo of Eric in my arms, cake on his nose, eyes lit up with joy, and I whispered, "Where did you go, son?" I didn't know it then, but that question would haunt every day that followed. The first time I truly felt it, it was quiet, barely even a moment. I came into the kitchen one morning and said, "Good morning, Rachel." She looked up from her phone, blinked, then turned back to her screen. Not a word, not even a nod. Eric came in a minute later, kissed her cheek, grabbed a protein shake from the fridge. "Morning, Pop," he said absently, already halfway out the door. I stood there holding a mug that wasn't mine. My old blue one with the chipped rim had been replaced again. Another small thing, one of many. That week I noticed more. Rachel had started inviting friends over for wine nights. Once, I came downstairs to grab my jacket, and I heard her say, "He just kind of floats around." I keep telling Eric it's time we had our own space. There was a soft chorus of "mm-hms" and sips. I backed away without being seen, but something inside me went cold. I told myself it was just stress, newlyweds adjusting, growing pains, but the truth settled in like dust on furniture. Quiet, but visible if you really looked. Eric wasn't the same either. He'd stop mid-conversation to answer Rachel's texts, leave the room when she called. When we watched our favorite football team, he'd scroll through his phone, barely reacting. I used to shout at the screen, and he'd laugh, call me dramatic. Now he barely looked up. I tried to keep it light. "Remember when you used to cry if they lost a game?" I joked one night. He didn't even smile, just muttered, "Yeah, people change." That line echoed in my head for days. One afternoon, I heard a heated whisper behind the closed bedroom door. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. It was just that I'd dropped a basket of laundry outside their room. Rachel was saying, "He's always here. It's not normal for a grown man to be living with his son. Your friends think it's weird." Eric's voice was muffled. "He's my dad, Rach. He's not just some guy." "Then act like it," she snapped. "Because right now, he's more like a roommate than a father. And we didn't sign up for that." The silence that followed was louder than their words. That night, Eric barely made eye contact with me. Rachel didn't come down at all. The next weekend, I made breakfast like I used to. Eggs, toast, coffee. I called up, "Breakfast's ready." Nobody came. I waited 20 minutes before wrapping it in foil and leaving it on the counter. Later, I found it untouched. The deeper hurt came not from being ignored, but from knowing they didn't even notice I'd tried. Rachel began referring to the house as our place. At first it was subtle. "We're thinking of painting our dining room." But one day I walked into a conversation she was having with a contractor. "We want to knock this wall out," she said. "Open it up. Make it feel more modern." The man nodded. "Sounds doable. The owner will need to sign off, though." Rachel smiled and gestured toward Eric. "He'll handle that. It's our home." I stood in the doorway and said quietly, "Actually, it's mine." Rachel turned, startled. Eric looked embarrassed. "Dad, come on. Don't be like that." "Like what?" I asked. "Like the man who built this house?" They both fell silent. The contractor excused himself, sensing the tension. I went upstairs without another word. It wasn't about the wall. It wasn't even about ownership. It was about being erased. They stopped asking me about anything. They rearranged the living room, threw out my old flannel blankets. "Moth-eaten," Rachel said. "My garage tools? Packed away to make space for their new SUV." Eric's tone changed too, more clipped. "Can you not leave your paper on the table? You left the lights on again." Even Pop disappeared. He started calling me Dad like a formality, like a line on a government form. One evening, I came home from a walk and heard Rachel on the phone again. "I mean, I get it. He's old. But we can't live like this forever. He just hangs around. It's exhausting." Pause. "No, Eric won't bring it up. He's too soft. But something's got to give." I didn't confront her. I just stood outside the door, holding my breath like an intruder in my own home. That night I sat on the porch until well past midnight. My back ached. My heart did too. I looked up at the stars. Used to sit out here with Marjorie and count them. tell Eric stories about constellations. Now the sky felt distant, silent. I thought about asking them directly, "Do you want me gone?" But I already knew the answer. I could feel it in the way Rachel avoided eye contact, in how Eric never asked how my day was anymore. I was becoming a burden, not through action, but through presence. A few days later, Eric mentioned something offhand. "Rachel's cousin is looking for a place. Might crash with us a bit. Hope that's okay." He didn't look at me when he said it. That's when I started wondering. Was this all leading somewhere? A subtle push? A gentle, manipulative shuffle toward the exit? I had to know. I had to start paying closer attention. Because this wasn't just drifting apart anymore. It felt like a strategy. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day that used to mean something in this house. Growing up, Sundays were sacred. Pancakes, church, lawn work, and a roast in the oven. Even after Marjorie passed, I tried to keep that rhythm going. That morning, I made myself scarce. I knew Rachel's parents were visiting, and I didn't want to get in the way. I trimmed the hedges, watered the garden, took a walk down to the corner store just to feel useful. When I got back, I heard laughter spilling from the backyard. The patio furniture I'd bought 20 years ago was freshly polished, laid out with wine glasses, a cheese board, and Rachel's parents lounging like they owned the place. I hovered by the back door, unsure whether to go in or stay invisible. Then I heard Rachel's voice. "We're just waiting until the paperwork clears," she said brightly, "but soon it'll be officially ours." Her mother leaned forward. "So the house will be in both your names?" Rachel smiled. "It's already in Eric's. His dad handed it over years ago after that surgery scare. It's just symbolic now. We've done all the renovations ourselves anyway." I stood there, frozen. The summer air felt cold on my skin. Symbolic? That house was my life's work. My memories. My grief. My joy. And to hear her reduce it to paperwork and renovation paint. I didn't walk in right away. I backed away, circled to the front porch, sat down on the swing. My hands trembled, not from age, but from anger. Not loud, explosive rage. A quiet, bone-deep ache. The kind that makes your ribs feel like they're closing in. About 15 minutes later, the patio door slid open. Eric stepped out, holding a tray of empty glasses. He nearly jumped when he saw me. "Hey, Dad," he said awkwardly. "Didn't know you were back." I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, not like a son, but like a stranger in my doorway. He cleared his throat. "We just had a little get-together with Rachel's folks. You should have come out." I didn't trust my voice, so I nodded. He stood there for a moment, then went back inside. Later that evening, after their guests had left and Rachel was upstairs, I asked Eric, "Is that how you talk about this house now, like it's already yours?" He looked up from his phone. "What do you mean?" "I heard Rachel," I said, more firmly now, "telling her parents you're just waiting for the paperwork to clear, like I'm a signature away from disappearing." Eric sighed, loud and theatrical. "Dad, don't make this a thing." I stared at him. "A thing?" He rubbed his temples. "You gave me the deed. We've been making this our home. Rachel and I are starting a life." "My name is still on that trust," I said quietly. "The transfer was never finalized. You remember that." He shrugged. "Yeah. But it's like... Come on, Dad. You're not exactly planning to move, are you? It's just a formality." That word again, formality. Like I was a placeholder, a temporary blip. I stood there in the living room, looking around at the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd varnished, the shelves Marjorie had filled with photos, now covered in wedding gifts and Rachel's scented candles. "I built this house," I whispered. "Every nail, every board." Eric crossed his arms. "And you've had your time in it, haven't you?" That hit me like a hammer to the chest. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Is that what you think?" I asked. "That my time is up?" He didn't answer. He just looked away. And silence, thick, undeniable, spoke for him. I went to bed that night but didn't sleep. I laid awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the creaks in the floorboards, the whisper of trees outside the window. It felt like the house was mourning with me. The next day, I found my chair, the recliner Marjorie bought me after my back surgery, sitting by the curb with a free sign taped to it. I stared at it, stunned. Rachel appeared on the porch with a cup of coffee. She didn't look surprised to see me there. "Eric said it was time to let go of old stuff," she said flatly. "It doesn't match anything in the living room." I didn't say a word. I just bent down, picked up the chair, and dragged it back inside. That night, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. He's impossible, Eric. He's clinging to everything like a relic. He's my father. Then act like it. I stopped listening after that. I didn't need to hear anymore. The next morning, a friend from the church, Darla, came by to drop off some pie. As she handed it to me, she said gently, "You okay, Frank? You seem tired." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I think I'm starting to understand how invisible a man can become in his own home." She squeezed my hand, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a while. Recognition, sympathy. Later that week, I got a letter from the bank. Apparently, someone had inquired about refinancing the property under Eric's name. It didn't go through, because legally, the house was still partially protected by the trust. But the fact that they tried, behind my back, was all I needed to know. This wasn't passive neglect. This was a plan, and it was time I made one of my own. It started with a whisper behind a closed door, then another. Soft, late-night conversations between Eric and Rachel when they thought I was asleep. I'd pass their room on my way to the bathroom and hear murmurs. Nothing clear, just the low rhythm of plotting. One night I paused longer than I should have. My hand hovered near the hallway light switch. Then I heard Rachel say, "If we just move him into assisted living now, he'll adjust. It's not like he does anything here." Eric didn't answer right away, just a heavy sigh. Then, "It's going to be messy if he refuses. He's still on the trust." That was it. I walked back to my room, heart pounding so loud I thought it might shake the walls. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my hands, wrinkled, calloused. These hands once lifted my boy out of a crib, built that shed in the backyard he used as a fort, held my wife as she died, and now they were talking about moving me out like old furniture. The next morning, I searched for the file, the one with all the documents, will, trust deed, insurance. I'd tucked it away years ago behind the bookshelf, wrapped in an old pillowcase. I'd nearly forgotten about it myself, but it was still there. I spent the rest of that day going through everything. The house wasn't theirs, not yet. Legally, the title was held under a living trust I set up after my heart surgery. I never finalized the transfer, never filed the quit claim, which meant despite their assumptions I still owned this home. That realization didn't comfort me. It crushed me. They'd been living here, planning behind my back, assuming I was either too old or too stupid to know better, and the worst part, I'd trusted them. I handed Eric responsibility because I believed in him. Now I started watching things differently. I kept my mouth shut, but my eyes open. The doorbell rang 2 days later, an estate agent. "Hi, I'm looking for Eric," she said cheerfully. "He mentioned he wanted to get an appraisal for resale value. I have a few comps in the neighborhood." I blinked. "Resale value?" She tilted her head. "He didn't tell you?" I gave her a polite nod, then watched as she awkwardly backed away. That night, I sat in the garage and just remembered. Marjorie used to sit with me out here on hot summer evenings, lemonade in hand. We didn't talk much, just watch the sun dip behind the trees. Sometimes she'd hum, sometimes she'd cry about missing her mother. I always listened. One evening, during her chemo treatments, she'd whispered, "Promise me you'll stay in this house, Frank. Stay with our memories." I'd promised. And here I was, living like a tenant in the one place that still smelled like her. That weekend, I asked Eric casually, "Thinking about refinancing?" He looked up, startled. "Why would you ask that?" I smiled. "Bank sent a letter. They needed my signature." He waved it off. "Just exploring options. Securing the future." I leaned back in my chair. "And does that future include me?" Eric hesitated. "Dad, come on. You know we're not trying to push you out. We're just looking ahead. Rachel and I are thinking about starting a family. It's getting crowded." Crowded. That word stuck in my chest like a nail. I nodded. "Well, good luck with that." He seemed relieved I didn't push harder, but inside, something was starting to settle in me. A stillness, cold but steady. That evening, I pulled out the old photo album, the one Marjorie made. I hadn't opened it in years. On the first page was our wedding photo. On the second, baby Eric in a pumpkin costume. Pages of birthdays, school concerts, our trip to Yellowstone. I stopped at the one where Eric stood with me on the front porch, holding a sold sign the day we bought the house. I stared at that photo for a long, long time. That was the boy I raised. This man, this stranger letting his wife call me a burden, was not him. I knew then what I had to do. I couldn't change their hearts, but I could protect my dignity. And maybe, just maybe, keep my promise to Marjorie. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. I don't know what finally broke inside me. Maybe it was the look on Rachel's face every time I entered the kitchen, like I'd tracked mud across a clean floor. Maybe it was the silence Eric wore like armor, how he avoided eye contact as if I was already halfway in the ground. Or maybe it was just the smell of Marjorie's perfume, faint and fading from her old scarf in the hallway closet. Whatever it was, it happened on a Tuesday. I walked into the kitchen and saw my coffee mug, the one Marjorie had painted for our 25th anniversary, lying shattered in the trash. "Who broke this?" I asked quietly. Rachel didn't look up from her phone. "It fell, probably cracked weeks ago." Eric looked between us and shrugged. "It's just a mug, Dad." I reached into the trash and picked up the pieces. The handle was still intact. The words "Forever Yours" were smeared, but visible. "It wasn't just a mug," I said. "It was the last thing she gave me before the cancer got worse." Rachel stood, impatient. "We can buy you a new one. You hoard so much stuff. Honestly, it's hard to know what matters." That's when it happened. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Rachel, you live in my house, sleep under my roof, and drink my water. You will not disrespect me in my home again." Eric stepped forward. "Dad, don't talk to her like that." "No, Eric." I turned to him, keeping my voice steady. "I've kept quiet for too long. You think I don't hear the conversations, the plans, the lies. I'm not deaf. I'm not senile." He threw up his hands. "What do you want me to say?" I stared at him, willing him to meet my gaze. The truth would be a good place to start. Rachel scoffed. "This is why we talked about getting help. You get upset over a mug, and now you're accusing us of lying." "Getting help?" I echoed. "Is that what you call putting me in a home behind my back?" Eric's face went pale. There it was, the truth, flickering in his eyes like a faulty light bulb. "I saw the inquiry," I continued. "The brochure for assisted living tucked into your drawer. You weren't even going to talk to me first." Rachel was the first to recover. "We were trying to do what's best for everyone. This house isn't set up for someone your age." I laughed. Just once, sharp and bitter. "No. What you mean is, you're not set up for someone like me." Neither of them spoke after that. I left the kitchen, still holding the broken mug. I sat in the garage for hours, piecing it back together with glue that wouldn't hold. I knew it wouldn't, but it felt like I had to try. Later that week, Mrs. Dunlop from next door dropped off soup. She always had good timing. She leaned on the porch rail as I stood in the doorway. "You don't look well, Frank," she said gently. "They treating you all right in there?" I shrugged. "They think I'm already gone, Ellen. Just a formality." She nodded slowly. "You're not invisible, you know. A few of us have noticed things." I looked up. "Like what?" "Like how Rachel snapped at you during the block party. How Eric doesn't walk beside you anymore. And how your light's on most nights till after 2 a.m. I swallowed hard. She stepped closer. "You built this house, this life. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're a burden in it." Her words stayed with me. The next morning I opened the attic and pulled out my old lockbox. Inside were the trust papers, Marjorie's letters, and a card Eric made in 2nd grade that said, "My dad is my hero." I looked at that card for a long time. Then I made a call. I dialed up Mr. Hale, our family attorney for over 3 decades. He picked up in his usual gruff voice. "Franklin Turner, thought you were done with me." "Turns out I've got one more request," I said. We met 2 days later. I brought the papers. Hale looked them over, eyebrows slowly rising. "You want to change the terms of the trust?" he asked. "Yes." "And remove Eric from the will?" I nodded. "You sure about that?" I took a deep breath. "He made his choice. I'm making mine." We discussed everything. I laid out my plan carefully, not out of anger, but out of clarity. "I want the house protected. No transfer unless I die naturally. If they contest the will, it all goes to charity." Hale raised his eyebrows. "That's ironclad. Could start a war." I stared out his window at the city skyline, then let it. When I left his office, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vengeance. It was resolve. They thought they'd won, that they had outlasted me. But they forgot I wasn't finished. Yet I sat in Mr. Hale's oak-paneled office again the following Monday, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just an old man clinging to memories. I was a man with a plan. A painful one, yes, but necessary. "Let's go over it again," I said. smoothing the front of my jacket. I want to make sure it's airtight. Mr. Hale, with his thick glasses and slower than necessary manner, gave a firm nod. You've said this house stays in the trust until your natural death. Upon that, it transfers to charity, unless your conditions are met. Right, and if either Eric or Rachel tries to contest it, it nullifies their inheritance, he finished. Everything goes to the veterans' shelter downtown, as you specified. I nodded slowly, heart heavy. That shelter had been my first thought after Marjorie. She volunteered there before the cancer, said the place was her sanctuary. I figured if our house couldn't be my son's safe haven, it could be someone else's. We spent the next hour finalizing everything. Legal jargon filled the room like a second language, but I followed closely. I might have slowed with age, but I hadn't forgotten how to pay attention. Not anymore. When he passed me the pen to sign, my hand hovered. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a goodbye. Not just to the idea of family, but to the years I'd spent believing that love alone was enough to hold people together. I signed. One page, then the next, and the next. With each signature, I felt the weight shift. Not lift, but shift, like I'd handed part of the sorrow to the paper itself. Mr. Hale tapped the final page. It's done. I looked up. What happens now? Now? He folded the documents neatly into a leather folder. Now you wait. And you live. I left his office feeling like I'd buried someone, and in a way, I had. Back home, I kept the copies in the same lockbox where I kept Marjorie's letters. I sat on the edge of my bed and reread one of them, written during her last days in hospice. It was a shaky hand, barely legible, but it said, Frank, don't let grief blind you. If the people you raised forget your worth, you remind them with your silence and your strength. This house is your heart. Guard it. I folded it carefully and put it back. Later that week, Eric mentioned the realtor again. Dad, we've been talking, he began, standing in the doorway to my room like it wasn't mine. There's this place near Oak Ridge, assisted living but nice. You'd have your own space. I didn't look up from my crossword. Is that right? Rachel poked her head in behind him. It's really modern, safer too. And let's be honest, you don't need all this space. I tapped my pen against the paper. No, I suppose I don't. But I built it. So I'll keep it. Space or not. Eric's jaw tightened. You're being unreasonable. Maybe, but I've earned the right. He didn't press the issue further, but I could see it in his eyes. Frustration mixed with calculation. The next day I caught Rachel on the phone in the hallway. No, he hasn't agreed yet, she whispered. But if he goes into a facility, the equity will be ours eventually, right? Just takes time. I didn't say a word. I turned quietly and walked away, her words slicing through me like ice. They weren't even hiding it anymore. That night I made one more addition to the trust, a quiet clause. In the event I am forcibly moved into assisted living without my written consent, the trust becomes irrevocable and transfers immediately to charity. Mr. Hale called me after reviewing it. Frank, he said, that's the final nail. I replied, then let the coffin close. The next morning, I made copies and locked them away. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a walk to the cemetery. Marjorie's stone was worn smooth at the edges. I sat beside it, brushing off the leaves. I did it, Margie, I whispered. I finally did it. The wind stirred the branches above, the same wind that used to rattle our windows when we stayed up late watching storms roll in. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel relief, but I felt something quieter, dignity. They'd stripped a lot from me, but I'd taken something back. Not vengeance, not spite, control. That weekend I started packing a few small things, not because I was leaving, but because I had a feeling the confrontation was close. I put Marjorie's scarf in a box with her letters, the broken mug, a photo of Eric as a boy, smiling in his Cub Scout uniform. I didn't hate my son. That's what hurt most. I just didn't know him anymore. But he was about to know me. It came faster than I thought it would. The final blow, I mean. The thing that took everything from simmering tension to undeniable war. It was Sunday morning, barely past 7, when Rachel knocked on my bedroom door. Twice, short and sharp. I was already dressed. I always am. She didn't wait for a reply before stepping in. You'll need to start packing this week. We found a place. I blinked. A place? For you, she clarified, like I was slow. Assisted living in Cedar Creek. We put down a deposit yesterday. I stared at her. You did what? Eric appeared behind her, arms crossed. Dad, it's time. You need more care than we can give. You forget things. You get agitated. You wander at night. Wander? I repeated, stunned. You mean walking out onto the porch and sitting under the stars like I've done for 20 years? Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Rachel said. It's for everyone's good. I stood up slowly. My knees ached more than usual, but I didn't let it show. Where is this coming from? I asked. Eric's face tightened. You're making this house feel like a prison. You hover, you criticize, and, frankly, you don't contribute. I froze. I don't contribute, I repeated. Eric, I paid off this house. I bought your first car. I paid for your wedding. I kept the lights on when you got laid off and wouldn't admit it. What more do you think I owe you? Rachel shook her head. We're done arguing. The moving truck comes Friday. They have a spot ready. That's when it hit me. They weren't asking. They were telling. They thought they had the power now. I looked at Eric, my son, the boy who used to crawl into bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who cried after striking out at his first varsity game, the young man who had once whispered, I hope I turn out just like you, Dad. And now he stood there, treating me like an item to be relocated. All right, I said quietly. If that's how it is, then that's how it is. They both looked momentarily relieved, like they expected resistance and were glad not to get it. But I wasn't surrendering. I was preparing. That afternoon, I opened the closet in my study. Inside was a fireproof case. Inside that, the finalized trust, signed and notarized. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. My hands didn't tremble this time. I also opened the old safe in the hallway, the one nobody used anymore. Tucked behind some papers were the original house deed and Marjorie's letter of trust certification. They thought I'd forgotten where I kept things. They thought I was already slipping away. But I remembered everything. The week passed quietly. I didn't argue. I didn't show anger. I made my tea in the mornings. I listened to their whispered conversations. I watched them walk past me like I was a faded photograph nailed to the wall. I also made a few calls. First to Mr. Hale, to inform him that the clause regarding forced relocation was being triggered. He said he'd file the paperwork the next morning. Then to my friend Lionel, a retired judge and a good man. I asked him to witness something on Friday. He didn't ask questions. He said he'd be there. Finally, to Ellen next door. I asked if she could watch from her porch that morning. Of course, she said. Do you need help? No, I replied, but I want someone who knows me to see this. Friday arrived. At 9:15 a.m., the moving truck backed into the driveway. Two men jumped out, chatting, unaware of the storm they were walking into. Rachel appeared at my door, clipboard in hand. We'll start with your bedroom, she said, not even looking up. Try not to get in the way. I didn't move. Eric came down the stairs with boxes. Let's make this easy, okay? I turned toward the door and opened it. Lionel was standing on the porch, flanked by Ellen. Behind them, a sheriff's deputy stepped forward. Eric frowned. What's going on? I held up the folder. This house is in a living trust. I am the trustee. You are not authorized to remove me from it or relocate me without my consent. Rachel scoffed. That's not how this works. You're being paranoid. I handed her a copy of the legal document. Try contesting it, please. I dare you. The moment you do, this house transfers to the Marjorie Turner Veterans Fund, and you get nothing. Not a dime. Eric went pale. Lionel stepped forward. Everything is legal. You have no authority here. You tried to forcibly relocate a competent adult, which violates both civil law and the terms of this trust. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came out. I looked at them both. You wanted me out? Now it's you who are leaving. I turned to the movers. This job's canceled, and you'll want to talk to your dispatch before touching anything. They hesitated, clearly unsure, then nodded and backed away. Eric didn't say anything. He looked like a man who'd seen his reflection and didn't like what stared back. Rachel, though, wasn't done. You can't do this. We live here. No, I said. You stayed here, rent-free, as guests, and your welcome just expired. They left that afternoon. Not a word of apology, not a backward glance, just boxes and silence. And when the door closed behind them, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, but I also felt something deeper. I felt free. The invitation came in the mail 3 weeks later. White envelope, gold lettering, RSVP already filled out in our names. You are cordially invited to the baby shower of Rachel and Eric Turner. My stomach turned. There was no note, no apology, no phone call. Just that. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't been evicted by my own flesh and blood and watched them pack their lives away in silence. The nerve. They weren't just pretending we were still family. They were using the shower to clean the slate publicly. That much was clear. A reset button. And I wasn't about to let them press it. I called Ellen and Lionel again. I'm going, I told them. Lionel cleared his throat. You sure that's wise? No, I said, but it's necessary. The shower was being held at a rented hall near downtown. Fancy, with a small courtyard, little fountains, white tablecloths. I arrived early, in my best coat, holding the one thing they didn't expect, the truth. The moment I walked in, the room fell quiet. Eric froze by the drinks table, hand mid-pour. Rachel turned away from her group of friends and gave me a tight, incredulous smile. Dad, you came. I nodded. You invited me. Out of respect, she said carefully, not to make a scene. I walked past her and found a spot by the gift table. I placed my gift on it, a slim manila envelope. No bows, no glitter, just facts. Eric approached, face pale. What are you doing here? I'm here, I said calmly, because I want everyone to hear what you tried to do, what you actually did. His jaw tightened. This isn't the place. No, I agreed. It's the perfect place. You brought this into public. You want to play the loving son now. Let's show them who you really are. Rachel hissed. If you do this, you're done. I looked her straight in the eye. You did that already. The guests had noticed something was wrong. Murmurs rose like wind through tall grass. A few family friends drifted closer. Ellen stood just inside the door, arms crossed. Lionel nodded to me from the back. I took a breath and turned to the room. My name is Frank Turner, I began, voice steady. Some of you know me, some of you don't, but you all know my son. This man here, Eric, who, not long ago, called me a burden in my own home. Gasps. Soft, awkward laughter. People looked at Eric, then at me. I built that house, I continued. I paid every mortgage, fixed every pipe, painted every room. I buried my wife in that garden, and when I was no longer convenient to them, my own son and daughter-in-law tried to force me out. Rachel's voice cut in, sharp and panicked. He's exaggerating. I held up the documents. These are legal records, witnessed by lawyers, recorded. You tried to move me into a facility behind my back, called the movers, packed my things, labeled me senile without proof, and when I resisted, you said I didn't contribute. Eric's mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned toward the crowd. So I took back what was mine. I rewrote the will. I removed them. If they try to contest it, everything goes to the veterans' shelter my late wife loved so much. Someone clapped in the back. It was Lionel. Rachel's mother hissed something under her breath. The air shifted. Polite smiles vanished. Real expressions took their place. Shame, confusion, disbelief. A woman near the food table whispered, I thought he gave them the house. No, I said loud enough to carry. They thought they earned it. They didn't. Eric stepped forward finally, face flushed. You came here to humiliate us. No, I said softly. I came here so you'd never forget the price of disrespect. I came because pretending never brings peace. He lowered his gaze. You didn't have to do this. I leaned in. And you didn't have to throw your father away like garbage. The silence that followed was long and jagged, like a wound. I walked out after that, slowly, carefully. I didn't rush. I let every eye follow me. Let every word sink into their carefully curated day. Outside, Lionel opened the car door for me. You all right? He asked. No, I said honestly, but I'm right. Ellen was already waiting at my porch by the time we returned. She didn't say much, just handed me a warm slice of banana bread and squeezed my shoulder. Later that night, the phone rang. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. You ruined everything today. People think we're monsters. This was supposed to be about our baby. I stared at the screen. Then I powered off the phone. I sat by the window, looking out at the empty driveway, the garden now slowly dying in the August heat. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired, but I was no longer powerless. And sometimes, that's the only justice a man gets. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The days after the baby shower were the quietest I'd ever known. No more texts, no knocks at the door. The house didn't feel peaceful. It felt abandoned, and not just by Eric and Rachel. The silence ran deeper, like something had shifted permanently in the air, a weight lifted and replaced with emptiness. I woke early every morning, out of habit, made coffee, sat by the window. The rocking chair creaked, just like it always had, but now the sound echoed too loudly in the empty room. The garden was beginning to wither. I hadn't tended to it in weeks. I found myself staring at Marjorie's rose bush for a long time that Monday morning. It used to bloom late into fall. Now it sagged like it missed her hands more than I did. That was the hardest part. I wanted to tell her everything, sit by her headstone and pour it all out. But I couldn't bring myself to go yet. I wasn't ready for her silence either. The town, though, they weren't silent. Lionel told me people were talking. The story spread fast, as these things do in small places. Some thought I was brave, others thought I was bitter. One woman from church said I'd embarrassed my son during a vulnerable time. She hadn't said a word about Rachel mocking me at my own kitchen table. Funny how that works. Ellen came by often, quietly checking in. She never pried, just brought groceries, made soup, trimmed a few bushes in the yard. One evening, she left a note instead of ringing the bell. You did what many fathers couldn't. That doesn't make it easier, Frank. Just more necessary. I kept that note, slipped it into my Bible. I tried distracting myself. Opened old photo albums, watched black and white movies Marjorie used to love. I even went to the farmer's market one Saturday, hoping some noise would drown out the ache. But even among the crowd, I felt like a ghost. A few folks approached me there, quiet handshakes, nods of respect. One man, a retired fireman named Henry, clapped me on the back and said, "You taught him a lesson he'll never forget." But it wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't pride. It was grief. Grief for the years I'd poured into a son who didn't see me anymore. Grief for the version of myself that had believed love alone would always be enough. Grief for a future I had once pictured. Grandkids in my lap, laughter in the garden, holidays where everyone showed up early and stayed late. Instead, I had silence. Then, one afternoon, something shifted. I was sitting on the porch, watching a storm roll in, when a young voice called out, "Mr. Turner?" I turned. It was Abby, the little girl from next door. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. She held out a small plate wrapped in foil. "My mom said you might like some cookies. She made them with cranberries." I helped. I took the plate, managing a weak smile. "Thank you, Abby." She smiled back. "Mom says you're lonely." Her honesty made me laugh, truly laugh, for the first time in weeks. "Well, your mom isn't wrong." She sat beside me, legs swinging. "You can come over sometime. We have board games." That small gesture, the kind only children know how to make without fear or agenda, did something to me. It reminded me that connection wasn't dead, that not all bridges were burned. Later that week, Lionel stopped by with his grandson, Evan, who needed help building a birdhouse. They stayed 2 hours. We didn't talk much about Eric, just wood, glue, and the importance of lining things up before you hammer. Bit by bit, without asking for it, people began showing up. Not family, but people. Real people. Some wanted advice. Others brought over meals or just sat for coffee. An old army buddy called out of the blue, and we talked for over an hour about nothing and everything. I realized something important during that time. Family isn't always the one you raise. It's the one that stays. I began to think less about what I'd lost and more about what I still had. The house, the land, the memories that were mine alone. And with that shift, something stirred inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but purpose. I started cleaning out the spare room, then the attic, then the garage. I didn't know exactly why, just that it felt like I was making space for something, or someone. One night, I stood by the rose bush with pruning shears. I trimmed back the dead growth, gently and carefully, like Marjorie used to. The scent of soil and memory filled the air. I looked up at the window, our old bedroom, and I whispered, "I think I know what to do now." It wasn't revenge, it was renewal. And it started with the very place they tried to take from me. This house, this sanctuary, this soil soaked with a lifetime of love and sweat. It would live again. But not for them. For someone who needed it. For someone who knew what it meant to be cast aside and still stand tall. Because if I had to rebuild family from the ground up, I'd start with people who knew what home really meant. And this time, I wouldn't hand it over so easily. It started with a conversation. Lionel and I were sipping coffee on the back porch, watching Evan run around the yard with a kite. The boy had more energy than I knew what to do with, but there was joy in watching him. "You ever think about turning this place into something more?" Lionel asked suddenly, gesturing toward the wide stretch of land. "I mean, Frank, you've got space, quiet, and time. Not everyone's got all three." I looked around, not really sure what he meant. "More?" "Yeah, something useful, something that matters. Maybe not to them." He didn't have to say Eric and Rachel. "But to someone." That sat with me long after he left. That evening I went through the old guest room again, found some of Marjorie's notebooks. She used to volunteer with the church shelter, jotting down ideas for a halfway house for women and young mothers. "A warm place to land," she'd called it once. I flipped through her handwriting, faded, but still strong, and something in me clicked. Maybe I couldn't bring back what I'd lost, but I could honor what we'd built, what she had dreamed. The next morning, I called Ellen. "Do you still work with that women's center downtown?" I asked. There was a pause. Then her voice lit up. "Frank Turner, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I'm thinking maybe this house deserves a second life," I said, "and maybe I do too." Ellen came over the next day, arms full of paperwork, pamphlets, and a fire in her belly. We sat for hours at the kitchen table, my table, and drafted a plan. A transitional home, short-term stays for women with children, especially those getting out of difficult situations. We'd offer shelter, meals, job resources, just enough stability to give them a fighting chance. The more we talked, the more it felt right. Like Marjorie was nodding somewhere in the room. By week's end, I had the ball rolling. Cleared out the garage to turn into a second sleeping area, repaired the leaky sink in the hallway bathroom, called a few friends from church who still had tools and strong backs. Even Evan helped, carrying boards and handing me screws like it was the greatest adventure of his life. Word spread. People showed up, old vets, retired teachers, moms from down the street. A young woman named Cora, who used to be homeless herself, offered to paint the rooms. She brought pizza and stories and a kind of fire I hadn't seen in years. "You're doing something powerful here, Mr. Turner," she told me, wiping sweat from her brow. "This place, it's going to mean everything to someone." I believed her. For the first time in a long while, I went to bed feeling full. Not with food, but with something deeper. A purpose, a pulse. And I wasn't alone anymore. The house buzzed with life again. Laughter, footsteps, music. Not the same as when Eric was a child, but in many ways better. There was no pretense here. No silent expectations. Just people helping people. One morning, I found myself in Marjorie's garden again. The roses had started blooming. I sat by them with a mug of coffee and whispered, "You were right, love. This place was never meant to grow cold." I could feel her in that breeze, gentle and proud. We filed the paperwork to make it official. Marjorie's house, a home for hope. I had the wooden sign carved by hand and hung it above the porch. When I stepped back and looked at it, tears stung my eyes. Not from sorrow this time, from healing. We planned a small, soft opening in a few weeks. Just a gathering of those who helped. Nothing big, but to me, it would be the start of something massive. Still, I knew a storm was brewing. Eric hadn't called, neither had Rachel, but word must have reached them. This was still their hometown, and when people gossip, they don't whisper. I imagined what he might say if he saw the sign. If he stepped into the house he tried to take and saw it filled with strangers, with warmth, with meaning, and none of it for him. Would he be angry, hurt, ashamed? I didn't know. I just knew this. I no longer built this place for him. The last photo of Eric and Rachel still sat in the hallway frame. I stood before it one night, debating what to do. For a moment, I nearly tossed it, but I didn't. I moved it into the drawer instead, not out of hate, but because it didn't belong on these walls anymore. A new family was coming, a chosen one, formed not by blood, but by bond, and they deserved to see themselves reflected here. One day, Abby came over with her mom to drop off some blankets. The little girl tugged on my shirt and said, "I like your house better now." "Why's that?" I asked. "Because it has more people," she said with a grin, "and it smells like cookies." I laughed. "That's probably thanks to Cora." "I wish my grandpa was like you," she said quietly, almost to herself. That hit me harder than anything else could have. I bent down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Maybe you can borrow me sometimes." She nodded seriously, like it was a real agreement. And just like that, I knew I had done the right thing. The house was becoming a haven, the way Marjorie would have wanted, and maybe, just maybe, the way I needed it to be too. But one thing remained, one last chapter I hadn't closed. I had a feeling that chapter would knock soon, and when it did, I'd be ready. They didn't look like family, not the kind in framed portraits or Christmas cards, but the way they showed up, baking pies, fixing windows, folding sheets, sharing meals, they felt more like kin than my own blood had in years. That's when I realized family isn't about who you raise, it's about who stays. Cora was here nearly every day now, helping coordinate with the Women's Center. She'd been through hell, abusive parents, shelters, even a brief time on the streets, but she walked into each room like it owed her nothing. Only she gave. One morning, I found her humming softly while fixing the pantry shelf. "You remind me of my wife," I told her. "Marjorie was a little taller, maybe a bit bossier, but she had your fire." Cora smiled, dusting flour off her hands. "Sounds like my kind of woman." "She'd have liked you," I said, and I meant it. 3 women had moved into Marjorie's house by then, each with a different story, each with a child. Little feet patted down the hallway, giggles filled the kitchen. And somehow it didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like healing. Every Friday night, we had potluck dinners on the back porch. Evan came, dragging Lionel with him, and so did Abby and her mother, even a couple of the old choir ladies. We'd pass dishes around, share stories, and laugh about things that didn't need fixing. It was strange how easily they accepted me, as if I'd always been Mr. Frank, the man with the house and the heart, not the man who'd once been cast aside by his own son. I started teaching Evan how to whittle wood. His small hands fumbled, but his curiosity was boundless. One afternoon he asked, "Why don't your son and his wife come to dinner?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Sometimes people forget how to love back. It doesn't mean you stop loving, just means you love somewhere else. He nodded, and we kept carving in silence. On Sunday mornings, I sat out on the porch with a mug of coffee and listened to the house behind me come alive, the clink of dishes, the soft footsteps of tired but safe mothers, the squeals of children discovering joy again. That was more church than I'd had in years. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything gold, someone knocked at the door. It was Abby, but not alone. She held the hand of someone I hadn't seen in a long time, someone who once cried on my shoulder after skinning his knee, someone who once said I was his hero. My grandson, Noah. He'd grown tall, maybe taller than me now, with his mother's jawline and his father's eyes. But those eyes weren't cold. They were searching. "Can we come in?" Abby asked. I stepped aside without a word. We sat in the living room. The same couch that once held Eric and Rachel during their newlywed days now hosted a quiet reconciliation I hadn't dared to hope for. Noah spoke first. "Grandpa, I didn't know." His voice trembled, and I saw the boy he'd once been buried under guilt. "I didn't know what they said to you, or what they planned. I just thought, you left." "I didn't leave, son," I said gently. "I was pushed." He swallowed hard. Abby rubbed his back. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have called. I should have asked." "You're here now," I said. "That means more than you know." He looked around the house, now warm with life and laughter, and said, "This place feels good, like it's breathing again." I smiled. "It is." We talked for over an hour, about his studies, his dreams, his regrets. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't need to. He asked for time. "I want to help," he said. "I don't have much, but maybe I could come on weekends, fix things, run errands." I nodded slowly. "You can do more than that. You can help this house grow." That night, as he left, he turned and hugged me tight. Not out of duty, out of love. And just like that, a piece of me healed. Cora found me later, staring out at the stars. "You okay?" she asked. "Better than I deserve," I said. She chuckled. "Nah, Frank, you're getting what you gave." The next morning, I replaced the photo in the hallway. Not of Eric and Rachel. This time, it was a new one, taken during one of our Friday dinners. Evan on my shoulders, Abby laughing beside the garden, Cora waving a spoon in mock warning. And behind us, the women of Marjorie's house, smiling. Chosen family. They didn't share my name or my blood, but they shared my days, my work, my heart, and that was more than I ever asked for. The town had begun to notice too. People dropped off clothes, volunteers offered tutoring. A local restaurant owner even promised free meals once a week. Marjorie's house had become more than a shelter. It had become a beacon. I couldn't change what Eric did, or undo the words that shattered me. But I had taken that pain and built something lasting from it. And though he hadn't come, though he hadn't called, I no longer waited, because I had found my people, and they had found me. I was in the garden, trimming back the roses Marjorie once loved, when I heard the gate creak open. I turned, shears still in hand. There he was, Eric, my son, standing awkwardly in the path, hands in his jacket pockets, head bowed slightly like a schoolboy about to be scolded. His face looked thinner, his eyes darker than I remembered. A man burdened, not by age, but by choices. "I heard about what you're doing," he said. His voice was quiet, careful, like he wasn't sure he had the right to speak here. I didn't answer. I just watched him. He took a few steps forward, his shoes crunching on the gravel. "I'm not here to argue, or ask for anything." Still, I said nothing. I wanted to see it. The house. He looked past me toward the porch where Cora's son was chasing a ball, and a volunteer carried a basket of laundry inside. Music played faintly from a window. "It looks different," he said. "It feels different too," I replied, finally. Eric swallowed hard. "Dad, I was wrong." He didn't dress it up, didn't stammer or justify, just said it plain. I waited. I let Rachel's voice become mine. I let her control things that should have been between you and me. And I wanted more. The house. The money. I told myself it was for Noah's future. But it wasn't. It was about control. About pride. There was no wind, but the silence between us rippled like water. "I didn't come to ask forgiveness," he added. "I wouldn't expect that." "Good," I said, sharper than I meant to, "because it's not yours to expect." He nodded, not offended, just accepting. "I lost everything after that day," he admitted. "Rachel left, took half of what little we had. Noah moved in with Abby. I tried to find work, but everything dried up. I was bitter, angry, at myself, at you, but mostly at the man I let myself become." He paused. "And I saw the fundraiser online, for Marjorie's house. Your name was all over it, and the photos. Dad, I saw your smile." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw my son again, not the man who once called me a burden. I realized I hadn't seen you smile like that since Mom died. I lowered the shears. "You know what broke me?" I said, voice low. "It wasn't the money, or even the house. It was when you stood in my kitchen and made me feel like I was a guest in the home I built, like my life no longer mattered." His lips trembled, and he nodded. "I know," he whispered. "I replay that moment more than you'll ever know." We stood there in the fading light, father and son, years of silence pressing between us. "I'm not asking to move back in," he said. "I'm not even asking to come to dinner. I just wanted to say, I see it now. What I did. And I'm sorry." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. "I found this in one of your old boxes. Thought maybe you'd thrown it out, but I held on to it." He handed me a weathered, faded Polaroid. Eric at 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders, both of us covered in mud after building the treehouse. "You used to call it our kingdom," he said. "Said I was your prince and you were the tired old king." I stared at the photo for a long time. My throat tightened. "I never stopped being proud of you, Eric," I finally said, "even when I hated what you'd become." He looked down, tears brimming in his eyes. "I don't deserve your pride," he whispered. "Maybe not, but I gave it anyway. That was always my way." The porch door creaked open, and Evan came bounding out. "Mr. Frank, Cora says dinner's ready." Eric glanced at the boy, then back at me. "You've got a new life here," he said, backing away. "A better one." He turned, starting back toward the gate. "Eric," I called after him. He paused. "You don't have to come back, but if you ever do, come as a man who builds, not one who takes." He nodded slowly. "I'll try." And with that, he walked out the gate, the same way he walked out of my life years ago. Only this time, it didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like closure. That night at dinner, I didn't mention the visit. I just passed the mashed potatoes, laughed with the women, and told Evan he was cutting his meat wrong. But in my pocket, I kept the photo. My prince, back when the kingdom still stood. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The sun filtered through the curtains just the way Marjorie always liked. Soft, golden, like honey spilled across the floor. It was the opening day. Not a ribbon cutting, no news vans or fancy speeches. Just a pot of coffee, 24 folding chairs, and the door left wide open. They came slowly at first. A young mother with a toddler on her hip, unsure if she belonged. An older man with arthritis in his hands and war in his eyes. A teenager fresh out of foster care, looking everywhere but into anyone's eyes. I greeted each one like a neighbor, not a savior. This place is yours too, I told them. The sign on the gate read, Marjorie's house, a place to land. We didn't call it a shelter or a program. It wasn't for broken people. It was for people trying to rebuild, like I had. Every room in the house had been cleaned, painted, repurposed. Marjorie's old sewing room was now a quiet space for reading and reflection. The garage had been converted into a workshop. We hosted meal nights, group meetings, quiet dinners for anyone who just needed company. And the walls? They echoed with laughter again. Real, loud, unpolished laughter. Sometimes I'd sit in my chair by the fireplace, the same one where I once sat alone, and watch a child color on the floor, or a volunteer lead a baking class, or Evan chase his new friends down the hallway. There were no titles here, no Mr. Frank, just Frank. A man who once lost everything and found something better. One night I stood at the edge of the porch as dusk settled in. The wind was light. The sounds from inside the house were muffled but warm, plates clinking, someone humming. A young man walked up the driveway, long legs, nervous hands. "Are you the guy who runs this place?" he asked. I nodded. He looked unsure. My dad said this was somewhere I might be welcome. I just got out of a bad spot. "What's your name?" I asked. "Jacob." "Hungry, Jacob?" He nodded. "Then you're already family. Come on in." He followed me inside. No forms, no red tape, just one foot after another, into a home. Weeks later, I found him in the garden, pulling weeds. Said I should help out. He shrugged. "You just did," I told him. More came. A single dad trying to get back on his feet. A runaway. A widow who hadn't spoken in weeks but found her voice in the baking room. Even some old neighbors who'd once avoided me now offered donations and time. Word spread. But it was never about growing big. It was about growing right. One evening, I stood in the kitchen stirring soup when Evan asked, "Did your wife live here too?" I paused, smiled. "She did," I said, "and she'd have loved this noise." He looked around the room, eyes bright. "Was she nice?" "She had a soft voice and strong hands," I said. "She made jam from scratch and cried at parades." Evan thought for a moment, then nodded. "Sounds like someone who would have made a good grandma." I nearly dropped the ladle. "She would have," I whispered, and I realized then, this house wasn't haunted anymore. It was healed. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in front of her photo, the one I moved to the entryway so everyone could see her smile. "I did it, Marjorie," I'd whisper. "I finally let go of what they took, and gave it to someone who needed it more." The funny thing was, in giving it away, I found myself whole again. One morning, as the spring rain fell gently on the roof, I opened a letter. It was from Noah, my grandson. He'd written in small, careful handwriting, "Grandpa, I miss you. Mom and Dad fight less now. I wish we could come visit. I saw the pictures of the house. It looks happy. You look happy. I hope I can be like you someday." I traced my finger over his words. I'd never stopped loving that boy, even when I'd been shut out. I wrote him back, told him the door would always be open. One day, maybe, he'd come and see what real family looks like. Not the kind that takes, but the kind that builds. As for Eric, I hadn't seen him since the garden, but I didn't need to. Some wounds heal with distance. Others just leave a scar that stops aching over time. I walked out onto the porch that evening as the lights inside the house flickered on, one by one. Behind me, voices, clinking dishes, shared stories. In front of me, the wind stirred the trees. Marjorie's house stood tall, not just with bricks, but with purpose. And I, Frank Reynolds, widower, father, grandfather, retired carpenter, was no longer a burden. I was the roots beneath something blooming. That night, I left the porch light on, just in case someone else needed a place to land.